Night had fallen over Marrakech, casting a thick blanket of darkness over its narrow streets and bustling markets. The air was thick, with the rich aromas of spices, dust, and sweat, making the city seem both alive and menacing. Amina, a young woman with eyes full of fear and determination, made her way through the crowd, trying not to draw attention to herself. Her heart was pounding, and every sound seemed like a harbinger of danger. A year ago, she was a prisoner, locked in a basement on the outskirts of the city, where traffickers treated her and other women like merchandise. The promises of work in Europe, the deception, the violence, all were behind her. But the shadows of the past lingered. Escaping in her darkest hour, she found herself in the bustling Jamaa el-Fna market, where 1,000 voices and smells mingled in chaos that could be her salvation or her death. With no papers, no money, and wounds on her body and soul, Amina was stealing food from a counter when a vendor spotted her. A chase ensued, and in the chaos, she ran into Yusuf, a local journalist who had been investigating the trafficking ring for months. His eyes, tired and determined, met hers, and in that moment, a silent agreement was formed between them. He would help her, and she would give him the key to the mystery. In a small cafe, hidden from prying eyes, Amina began to tell her story. Her voice shook, but her words were firm. Deception, captivity, fear, and hope. Yusuf listened, writing down every detail, realizing that before him was not just a witness, but the key to the destruction of a powerful and dangerous network. Meanwhile, in the shadows, Malika, one of the leaders of the criminal organization, learned of the escape. His face was distorted with rage. He knew that Amina knew too much and ordered that she be found at any cost. Time was against them. In 3 days, a new cargo was due to arrive. Women who were planned to be sold in Europe, and if Amina was not found, all their plans could collapse. The city lived its own life, unaware of the struggle unfolding in its darkest corners. Amina and Yusuf stood on the threshold of a dangerous path, where every mistake could be the last, and the truth, the most terrible weapon. Amina winced as the waiter placed a cup of mint tea in front of her. The steam rose in thin wisps, reminiscent of the smoke from the hookahs in the house where she had been held. The smells could instantly transport her back to the past, to a windowless room where the air was thick with sweat, fear, and cheap incense meant to mask the smell of human despair. "Go on." Yusuf gently nudged her, noticing how she froze, staring into space. His notebook was already half full of tiny handwriting, names, dates, addresses, information that could cost them both their lives. "We were brought through the desert," Amina continued, clutching her cup with trembling fingers as if trying to keep warm, though the night was mild. "First there was a bus from my village to Agadir. There we were met by a man who said he was a representative of a European company. He took our passports to arrange work visas, he said." Her gaze clouded over, returning to the day when dreams of a better life had not yet turned into a nightmare. There were 7 of us, all girls from poor families. We all believed in the fairy tale of working as maids or waitresses in Spain with a salary we couldn't even dream of at home. Yusuf nodded without interrupting. He had heard this story dozens of times from different people, relatives of the missing, bystanders, police informants, but never from a surviving victim who could name names and places. "Instead of Spain, they brought us here to Marrakech, At first, they kept us in some warehouse on the outskirts. They made us sign papers in a language we didn't understand. They said we had to work off the travel expenses and the paperwork. And then, her voice wavered, but she forced herself to continue. Then they separated us. They took me and 3 other girls to the house I had escaped from. The rest were taken somewhere, I don't know where. Yusuf made a note in his notebook. Separating the victims was a typical tactic. It made them easier to control, less likely to organize resistance. Can you describe the house or name the neighborhood? Amina closed her eyes, trying to remember details that might help identify the place. It's an old house with a courtyard. It's unremarkable from the outside, but the interior is richly decorated. Marble floors, carved furniture. We were kept in the basement, but sometimes they brought us upstairs when clients came. She said the last word with such disgust that Yusuf didn't need to clarify what she meant. I heard the guards talking to each other. The house belongs to a man named Malik, but the real owner is someone nicknamed Jackal. I've never seen him. I've only heard his name. Yusuf looked up from his notebook. The Jackal. The name had cropped up several times during his investigation, but always as a ghost. A mention in conversation, a whisper, a legend. No one knew who he was, but many feared his name. What else do you know about the Jackal? Just that even. Malik is afraid of him. One day there was a call and I heard Malik talking to him. He was like a scared child, although he always behaved like a god with us. Amina fell silent, looking into her cup. The tea had grown cold, but she still held onto it, as if it were an anchor keeping her grounded in reality. How did you manage to escape? Yusuf asked after a pause. A shadow of a smile crossed her face. Not joy, but bitter pride. I waited. I watched. I remembered. When you're deprived of everything, you start to notice details that others miss. The guard who brought food always checked the lock on the basement door, but he never checked the small window near the ceiling. It was too narrow for a grown man. She rubbed her shoulder automatically, and Yusuf noticed fresh abrasions. I was saving up my strength. I gave some of my food to the other girls so they wouldn't notice that I was getting stronger. And today, when the guard was distracted by the bell, I used a chair to get to the window. It was narrow, I tore off my skin, but... She shrugged. Freedom was worth the pain. Yusuf looked at her with involuntary admiration. How much fortitude does it take to not break down in such conditions, to plan an escape for months, risking one's life? And the other girls? Why didn't they go with you? Amina's face darkened. Fear is stronger than any chains, Yusuf. Some of them have been there for over a year. They have been convinced that it is worse outside, that the police will take them back or put them in jail, that their families will turn their backs on them because of the shame. She took a sip of her cold tea, as if trying to wash away the bitterness of her words. And sometimes they are right. Where can a woman go without documents, without money, with the stigma of a prostitute? Who will believe that we were forced? Who will protect us from Malik and his people, who have eyes and ears everywhere? Yusuf didn't know what to say. She voiced the questions he asked himself every time another story about a missing girl landed in his hands, and the editor refused to publish the material without concrete evidence. "I'll help you," he finally said. "I have friends who will provide a safe place, and your story is just the proof I've been looking for months." Amina looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. "Why are you doing this? It's dangerous. These people will stop at nothing." Yusuf put down his notebook and for the first time in the conversation allowed his professional mask to slip, revealing his personal pain. My sister, Leila. 3 years ago she went to Tangier for an interview. We haven't heard from her since. He took a tattered photograph of a smiling, bright-eyed girl out of his wallet and handed it to Amina. The police closed the case after a month. They said she probably went to Europe to look for a better life and didn't want to keep in touch with her family. But I know my sister. She would never make our mother suffer like that. Amina studied the photograph closely, and something flashed in her eyes. Recognition? Fear? But she quickly handed it back. "I'll help you find the truth," she said quietly. "But we have to be careful. If Malik finds out I talked to a journalist..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't have to. They both knew the stakes of this game. Yusuf paid for the tea and helped Amina up. The night was growing deeper, and with it, the danger. They needed to find a safe place before dawn. "We'll go to my mother's," he decided. "It's on the outskirts of town. No one will look for you there." Amina nodded, trusting him, not because she believed him, but because she had no choice. In a world where she had been turned into a commodity, trust was a luxury she could not afford. But now, in this small cafe with its cracked tiles and the smell of mint, she took the first step toward reclaiming her humanity. They walked out into the night, 2 figures among thousands on the streets of the ancient city. No one paid any attention to them. Just a man and a woman, perhaps tourists or locals returning home after a long day. No one, except for a pair of watchful eyes watching from the shadows. Eyes that belonged to the man who was already dialing Malik's number on his phone. In his office, in a luxurious mansion in the modern part of Marrakech, Malik Al-Fasi threw his phone across the room as soon as he finished talking. His well-groomed face contorted with rage, his expensively ringed hands clenched into fists. "She's with a journalist," he muttered through his teeth, addressing the man standing motionless by the door. "With that same persistent scribbler who's been digging under us for the last 6 months. Rashid, a former soldier with a scarred face, kept his expression unchanged. His job wasn't to express emotion, it was to solve problems. And a runaway girl and a nosy journalist were definitely problems. "Find them," Malik ordered, "and make sure they don't tell anyone, especially about the cargo that's arriving in 3 days." Rashid nodded and walked silently out of the room, leaving Malik alone with his rage and fear. Because behind his anger was fear. Fear of a man whom even he, who controlled a large part of Marrakech's criminal underworld, feared more than death. If the Jackal learned of the escape and possible leakage of information, the consequences would be... Malik didn't even want to think about it. He had seen what the Jackal did to those who failed him. He walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city at night. Somewhere out there, among those lights, was Amina, the key to his survival or death. And he was willing to burn the city to the ground to find her. Yusuf's mother's house stood on the outskirts of Marrakech, where the bustle of the city gradually gave way to the quiet of the Atlas foothills. The 1-story ochre stone building, with its courtyard and old orange tree, seemed frozen in time. Little had changed here in the last 30 years. Like the grief of Fatima, Yusuf's mother, which had not subsided with her daughter's disappearance. When Yusuf brought Amina, the old woman's first glance was full of suspicion. Her eyes, once bright, now faded from tears and sleepless nights, studied the stranger with the wariness of a wounded animal. But something in Amina's frail figure Her slumped shoulders and hunted gaze awakened in Fatima a maternal instinct that had not faded even after so many years of pain. "She's staying with us, Mom," Yusuf said, not asking permission but simply stating a fact. "She has nowhere to go." Fatima nodded silently and pointed to the door to the small room that had once belonged to Leila. The room had remained untouched since she had disappeared. The bed made, the school books on the table, the faded photographs of her friends on the wall. A sanctuary of hope that Fatima refused to let go of. "I'll make a tagine," she said, heading for the kitchen. Cooking was her way of dealing with anxiety, filling the void with action. Amina stood in the middle of the room, not daring to touch the missing girl's belongings. She felt like a ghost, invading someone else's life, someone else's grief. "I can't sleep here," she whispered. "This is her room." Yusuf understood her feelings. He himself rarely came here, unable to bear to see his sister's life frozen in time. "Leila would like to help," he said quietly. "She always protected the weak." Amina sank slowly onto the edge of the bed, her fingers instinctively brushing the bedspread, soft and hand-embroidered. Fatima's work, she knew, part of the dowry her mother was preparing for her daughter. "Tell me about her," Amina asked. "About your sister." And Yusuf told about a bright, stubborn girl who dreamed of becoming a doctor, who argued with traditions but respected her family. About how she received a scholarship to study in Tangier, how she rejoiced at the opportunity to escape the cramped world of her hometown, about the last phone call, full of plans and hopes, and about the silence that came after. The police didn't help. Yusuf smiled bitterly. They conducted a formal investigation. They questioned neighbors, checked her dorm room. They found a witness who saw her getting into an expensive car with foreign license plates. They concluded that she had decided to leave for Europe with a rich lover. He fell silent, clenching his fists in impotent rage. "I didn't believe it. Leila would never have left without telling us, without leaving her mother in the dark. I started my own investigation. I went to Tangier, talked to her dorm mates, teachers. I found her friend, who told me that not long before she disappeared, Leila had met a woman who offered her a part-time job as a translator for rich tourists." Amina winced. The story sounded too familiar. "Classic recruiting scheme," she said quietly. "That's how they lured me in, too. Promised a job at a hotel in Spain, good money, legal papers." Yusuf nodded, his eyes dark with pain and anger. "I started digging deeper. I found several more cases of young women disappearing in Tangier, Casablanca, Rabat. All with the same pattern: promise of work, meeting with a recruiter, disappearance. I wrote an article, but the editor refused to publish it without concrete evidence and official police comments. And the police? They said they didn't have the resources to investigate the disappearance of adult women who most likely left voluntarily. One officer even suggested that I should accept reality and let my sister go live her life." Amina could see how the memories were hurting him. She gently touched his arm, a gesture of support that surprised them both. "I will help you find the truth," she said. "Everything I know, everything I saw, I will tell you. I will write it down. I will testify. These people must answer for what they did to me, to the other girls, to your sister." Yusuf looked at her with gratitude and new hope. For the first time in 3 years, he had a real chance to find out what had happened to Leila. "Thank you," he said simply. Fatima's voice came from the kitchen, calling them to dinner. The smell of spices filled the house, creating an illusion of normality that was so far from their reality. During dinner, Fatima watched Amina furtively, watching how she held her spoon, how she carefully tasted the food, as if she didn't trust its taste or was afraid it was poisoned. Her movement showed a fear that had become habitual, the alertness of a cornered animal. "What village are you from, daughter?" Fatima asked, breaking the silence. Amina looked up from her plate, surprised by the sudden question. "From Imlil, in the mountains," she answered after a pause. "My father grew olives." "Imlil," Fatima repeated, as if tasting the name. "A beautiful place. I was there once when I was a girl. The air is as clear as spring water." Amina smiled weakly, memories of home softening her gaze for a moment. "Yes, they are beautiful, especially in the spring when the almond trees bloom. Is your family still there?" The smile disappeared from Amina's face, replaced by an expression of pain. "My father died 2 years ago. My mother lives with my brother and his family. I left so as not to be a burden, so that I could send money home." She looked down, and Yusuf saw her fingers tighten around the spoon so hard that her knuckles turned white. "They think I work as a maid in a hotel in Spain," she added almost in a whisper. "I sent them money through a man who controlled us. He kept most of it, but some got through to them, enough for them to believe my story." Fatima reached across the table and covered Amina's palm with her own, wrinkled, spotted with age, but still strong. "Now you are here, daughter, and we will help you." There was more comfort in that simple gesture, in those simple words, than Amina could bear. The tears she had been holding back for months, for years, finally burst forth. Quiet, silent sobs that shook her thin shoulders. Fatima walked around the table and hugged the girl, holding her head to her chest as she had done with her children. She stroked her hair, whispering the ancient Berber words of comfort that her own mother had whispered to her as a child. Yusuf watched the scene with a lump in his throat. He saw his mother, who had lived in the stupor of grief for years, suddenly come alive, having found someone who needed her care. And Amina, broken by the horrors she had endured, for the first time in a long time, allowed herself to be vulnerable, to accept support. At that moment, he swore to himself that he would find the people responsible for the suffering of Amina, his sister, and hundreds of other women. That he would make them pay for every tear, for every life destroyed. But first he needed proof. Irrefutable, concrete, the kind that neither his editor nor the police could ignore. After dinner, when Fatima had gone to bed and Amina had settled, into Leila's room, Yusuf took out his laptop and voice recorder. It was time to systematize the information, to create a complete picture of the criminal network. "I want to record your testimony," he told Amina. "Every detail you remember, names, places, dates, anything that can help identify these people and prove their involvement in human trafficking." Amina nodded, steeling herself. She knew the memories would hurt, that she would have to relive the darkest moments of her captivity. But she also knew it was necessary, not just for Yusuf's investigation, but for her own healing. "Let's start at the beginning," she said, sitting up straight in her chair. "With the man who recruited me in Agadir." He called himself Hamid, a representative of a travel company from Barcelona. The next hours were a methodical descent into nightmare. Amina spoke, Yusuf wrote, occasionally stopping her to clarify details. She described the route they had been taken, the houses where they had been held, the people who had controlled them. She mentioned the names she had heard, described the appearance of those she had seen. Slowly, a map of the network's operations began to form on Yusuf's laptop screen. From recruitment in small villages and towns to transport across the desert. From temporary shelters to final destinations. The names of recruiters, guards, and middlemen formed a hierarchy, headed by the enigmatic Jackal, a man feared even by his own henchmen. "There's a new cargo due to arrive in 3 days," Amina said, as they got to the details of the current operations. "I heard Malik talking about it on the phone. Women from sub-Saharan Africa, Nigeria, Mali, Senegal. They'll be brought across the desert and then distributed to different locations in Morocco and Europe." Yusuf suddenly raised his head from the screen. "Do you know where exactly they are supposed to arrive? Time? Place?" Amina frowned, straining her memory. Malik was talking about a warehouse in an industrial area. He mentioned a name. Sidi Ghanem, I think. And the time was dawn. "Sidi Ghanem," Yusuf repeated, quickly making a note. "It's an industrial area in the east of the city. There are a lot of abandoned warehouses there. The perfect place for an operation like this." He leaned back in his chair, taking in the information he had received. If they could document the arrival of the cargo, get photographs, video, that would be the kind of irrefutable proof his editor was demanding. "We have to be there," he said firmly, "to film everything, collect evidence, and then pass the information on to the police and the press at the same time, so they can't hush it up." Amina turned pale. "It's too dangerous, Yusuf. If they catch us, I'll be careful. I'll take a camera with a zoom and shoot from afar." "No," she shook her head. "Not you. We. I'm going with you." "No way," Yusuf snapped. "You just escaped from these people. If they see you—" "That's why I have to go," Amina insisted. "I know how they work, how the security is organized. I can show you safe points of observation, and—" She paused. "I owe it to those women. I escaped, and they're still there. Or soon they will be, in this new cargo. I can't just sit here in safety while you risk your life." Yusuf saw the determination in her eyes. The same determination that had helped her plan and execute her escape from Malik's house. He knew there was no point in arguing. "Okay," he finally agreed. "But we'll follow a plan. No improvisation, no heroics. Our job is to gather evidence without getting caught." Amina nodded, accepting the terms. "Now you need to rest," Yusuf added, noticing how fatigue was finally starting to overtake her adrenaline. "We have a lot of work to do tomorrow." When Amina went to Leila's room, Yusuf was alone in front of his laptop, looking at the map of the criminal network they had compiled. The names, the places, the connections. It all added up to an organized, well-funded operation that couldn't exist without the patronage of powerful people. He opened a new file and began writing an article, not for his newspaper, but for the international news agency where his former colleague Karim worked. If local media refused to publish the truth, perhaps international pressure would force them to change their position. The words flowed easily, backed up by concrete facts from Amina's testimony. The history of human trafficking in Morocco, the routes, the recruitment methods, the conditions in which the victims were held, and names, as many as they could identify, from small-time recruiters to Malik Al-Fazi, the right-hand man of the enigmatic Jackal. After completing the draft, Yusuf sent an encrypted message to Karim asking to meet the following day. He then saved all the files to an external hard drive and carefully encrypted them, a precaution that would soon prove worthwhile. In the morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky over Marrakech in shades of pink and gold, Yusuf stepped out into the courtyard to perform his morning prayers, a ritual he had distanced himself from in recent years but which now gave him a sense of connection to something greater than himself. When he finished his prayer, he saw Amina standing in the doorway, watching him with an expression he couldn't read, a mixture of respect, curiosity, and perhaps a little envy. "You still believe," she said. It wasn't a question, more a statement of fact that surprised her. "Not always," Yusuf answered honestly, "especially after Leila disappeared, but sometimes faith is the only thing left when everything else falls apart." Amina nodded, understanding. Her own faith had been tested by years of captivity, but not destroyed entirely. Something remained, a smoldering ember that could flare up again if given a chance. "I made breakfast," she said, changing the subject. "Your mother taught me how she makes bread." Yusuf smiled as he followed her into the kitchen. This simple domestic moment seemed so out of place in the midst of their dangerous investigation, but it was moments like these that reminded them of what they were fighting for, the chance to live a normal life, free from fear and violence. Over breakfast, Yusuf outlined his plan for the day, meeting with Karim, gathering additional information about the warehouse in Sidi Ghanim, preparing to observe the arrival of the cargo. "I want you to stay here with your mother," he told Amina. "The streets are too dangerous for you right now." To his surprise, she didn't argue. Perhaps the light of day had made her more cautious, more aware of the risks. Or perhaps she simply realized that she would be more useful staying safe and continuing to work on mapping out the network's detailed operations. After breakfast, Yusuf headed into town, unaware that the house was already under surveillance. A man in nondescript clothes sat in a cafe across the street, slowly sipping mint tea, his eyes fixed on the gate. As Yusuf emerged, the man made a quick call. He went out, alone. The women remained in the house. On the other end of the line, Rashid smiled. The circle was closing. Soon the hunt would be over, and the prey would be his. The Atlas Mountains rose out of the morning mist, like ancient sentinels, watching over human destinies with the indifference of eternity. The road leading to the mountain village wound between the slopes, sometimes disappearing into the shadows of the rocks, sometimes emerging into sunlit areas. The old Peugeot of Hassan, a former policeman and friend of Yusuf, hummed hard on the climbs, but stubbornly continued to move. The car was tensely silent. Yusuf sat in the front seat, clutching a tattered map. Amina and Fatima sat in the back, two women bound by a shared pain, albeit experienced in different ways. The decision to leave Marrakech had been spontaneous after Yusuf noticed surveillance outside the office where he was meeting Karim. "They know about us," he said, returning home to find Amina and Fatima preparing dinner. "We have to leave. Now." Now, looking at the winding road ahead, Yusuf tried to collect his thoughts, to assess the situation. The meeting with Karim was productive. She was impressed by the collected materials and agreed to help with publication in an international publication. But for a full-fledged article, they still lacked irrefutable evidence. Photographs, videos, documents. "How much further?" he asked Hassan, breaking the silence. "An hour, maybe an hour and a half," he replied, not taking his eyes off the road. Depends on whether the road is washed out after yesterday's rain. Hassan was a robust man in his 40s, with a face lined more deeply than his age would have allowed. 15 years in the Marrakech police force had left their mark on him, both physically, in the form of a scar across his left eyebrow, and mentally. He was one of the few honest officers in a corrupt system, and it had cost him his career. My cousin's house is on the edge of the village, Hassan continued. It's isolated, with a good view of the valley. If anyone comes, we'll see them long before they reach us. Yusuf nodded, grateful for his friend's help. When he called Hassan asking for safe haven, Hassan didn't ask any questions. He simply said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes," and arrived with a full car and a bag of essentials. "Duh, you think they could have followed us?" Yusuf asked, looking back at the empty road behind him. "I doubt it," Hassan shook his head. "We left through the backyard, changed 2 cars. I know my business, Yusuf. Don't forget, I've been catching criminals for 15 years. And yet they found my house," Amina said quietly from the back seat. "They always do." Hassan met her gaze in the rearview mirror. "In the city they have eyes and ears everywhere. Corrupt cops, street informants, surveillance cameras. It's a different world up here in the mountains. People here don't trust outsiders and don't sell out for money." Amina didn't look convinced, but she said nothing. The last few days had taught her that safety was relative and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Fatima, who sat next to her, took her hand in hers, a gesture of support that had become familiar between them. A strange bond had formed between the old woman who had lost her daughter and the young girl who had lost herself. They understood each other without words, finding comfort in the other's silent presence. The car continued to climb the mountains, leaving behind civilization with its dangers and temptations. But even here, among the majestic peaks and deep gorges, they could not completely rid themselves of anxiety. Because they knew that somewhere there in Marrakech, preparations were underway for the arrival of the cargo, women whose fates could be as tragic as Amina's, if not worse, and time was running out inexorably. In his office in Marrakech, Malik Al-Farsi paced like a caged animal. His usually impeccable appearance was marred. His tie was loose, his shirt was rumpled, beads of sweat glistened on his forehead. "How could you miss them?" he growled at Rashid, who stood before him with an impassive expression. "You had one job, to watch the house." "They left through the backyard," Rashid replied calmly. "Changed cars twice. Professional work." "Professional?" Malik made a sound that was like a laugh, but devoid of any humor. "A journalist and a runaway whore tricked you like a child." Rashid's face remained impassive, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. A reminder that this man killed without hesitation and could have done the same to Malik if not for the chain of command. "They had an assistant," he said. "An ex-cop, judging by his methods. My people are investigating his identity." Malik took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. Panic would not solve the problem, and the problem was serious. If Amina and the journalist told about the operation, if they provided evidence to the international press or to non-corrupt police forces. "The shipment arrives at dawn tomorrow," he said, more to himself than to Rashid. "We can't cancel the operation. Too much money is involved, too many people are involved." "Then we need to find them before tomorrow morning," Rashid answered simply. "And how do you propose to do this? They could be anywhere." Rashid allowed himself a thin smile. an expression that looked especially sinister on his face. Not anywhere. A journalist won't leave town the day before something like this happens. He'll want to be here to document the cargo's arrival. This is his chance to get irrefutable evidence. Malik froze, realizing the logic of these words. Do. You think they'll be watching the warehouse? I'm sure of it. The only question is where exactly. I've already sent people to check all possible vantage points. Malik nodded, his panic gradually giving way to cold calculation. Okay, but we need a backup plan. If they manage to pass the information to the press or the police before the shipment arrives. I've seen to that, Rashid interrupted. I've doubled the security at the warehouse. I've got lookouts around the perimeter. No one gets near unnoticed. What about the police? If they get an anonymous call, the commissioner is aware of the operation. He will ensure that any calls about suspicious activity in the industrial area are ignored. Malik nodded again, feeling control of the situation returning to him. Rashid, for all his cruelty, was efficient. If anyone could find the fugitives before tomorrow morning, it would be him. Find them, Malik said, returning to his desk. And when you do, leave. No witnesses. Rashid nodded and walked out of the office with the silent gait of a predator. He had a job to do, and he intended to do it with his usual thoroughness. Cousin Hassan's house was a simple stone structure, clinging to the mountainside like a swallow's nest. Single-story with a flat roof and small windows, it had been built for protection from the harsh mountain winters, not for comfort. But right now its inconspicuousness and isolation were just what the fugitives needed. The host himself, Ahmed, greeted them with traditional Berber hospitality, hot tea and flatbread, despite the unexpectedness of the visit. He was 10 years older than Hassan, with a face weathered by mountain winds and hands roughened from working with stone. "My home is your home," he said when Hassan briefly explained the situation, leaving out details. "Stay as long as you need to." Yusuf thanked his host, relieved that Fatima and Amina would be safe, while he and Hassan returned to Marrakech to complete their investigation. After lunch, when Fatima and Ahmed went into the kitchen to prepare dinner, Yusuf, Hassan, and Amina gathered in a small room that served as a living room and dining room. With a map of Marrakech spread out on a low table, they began planning the operation to monitor the warehouse. "Here," Hassan pointed to a spot on the map, "is an abandoned building across from the warehouse. The upper floors have collapsed, but the first is fairly stable. There's a good view of the main gate from there." "It's too obvious a place." Yusuf shook his head. "They'll probably check it first." "What about this hill?" Amina pointed to a small rise to the east of the warehouse. "There should be a view of the side entrance from there. When I was there, they often used it to move girls." Hassan studied the map, estimating distances. "Perhaps. But we'll need a powerful lens to get clear pictures from that distance." "I have a telephoto lens," Yusuf said. "Powerful enough to shoot from up to a kilometer away." They continued to discuss, considering various options, assessing risks and opportunities. A plan began to take shape. Yusuf and Hassan would take up position on the hill a few hours before dawn, film the arrival of the cargo and the handover of the women, and then quickly leave the location to send the footage to Karim for international publication. "And then what?" Amina asked quietly when the main details were agreed upon. Yusuf and Hassan exchanged glances, realizing that this was a question beyond tactical planning. What would happen after the publication, after the network was exposed? Would they be able to return to normal life, or would the vengeance of the Jackal and his organization haunt them forever? "One step at a time," Hassan finally said. "First, gather evidence, get international attention. That will put pressure on local authorities to act." "What if they don't?" Amina insisted. "What if corruption is stronger than justice?" "Then we will continue the fight," Yusuf replied firmly. "With different methods, on a different level. But we will not stop until these people answer for their crimes." Amina looked at him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. Then she nodded, accepting the answer, though not entirely convinced. Evening was falling over the mountains, painting the sky deep shades of purple and indigo. In the house, kerosene lamps were lit. Electricity was a luxury here, available only for a few hours a day, thanks to a small generator. At dinner, the conversation deliberately steered clear of dangerous topics. Ahmed told stories about the mountains, about ancient Berber traditions, about how life in the village had changed with the arrival of tourists and modern technology. Fatima recalled her youth, when she first came to this place with her parents. Even Amina smiled sometimes, momentarily forgetting the shadows of the past and the threats of the present. Only Yusuf remained thoughtful. His thoughts were far away, in Marrakech, in the warehouse where tomorrow the fate of dozens of women and perhaps his own future would be decided. After dinner, when everyone had gone to their rooms, Amina found Yusuf on the roof of the house. He was sitting looking at the stars, incredibly bright here, far from the city lights. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting down next to him. "Too many thoughts," he replied, not taking his eyes off the sky. They were silent for a moment, enjoying the rare moment of peace before the storm that awaited them tomorrow. "I have something to tell you," Amina finally said, and something in her voice made Yusuf turn to her. "About your sister." Yusuf's heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this moment, dreading it, hoping for it, ever since he had shown Amina the photograph of Leila. "Do you know what happened to her?" Amina took a deep breath, gathering her strength. "I saw her at Malik's house about 6 months ago. She was one of us." Yusuf closed his eyes, trying to cope with the wave of emotions, the pain of having his worst fears confirmed, and at the same time the strange relief of knowing that Leila, at least then, was alive. "Are you sure it was her?" "Yes. When you showed me the photo, I recognized her right away. We were in the same room for weeks. She talked about her family, about her brother, a journalist, about her mother, who was waiting for her return." Amina's voice wavered, and Yusuf realized that she was hiding something else, something heavier. What happened next? "Where is she now?" Amina looked away, unable to look him in the eyes. "One day a man came, rich judging by his clothes and manners. A foreigner, a European. He chose Leila. He paid Malik a large sum to take her forever." "Take it? Where to?" "I don't know exactly. Leila said he lives in a coastal town. Essaouira, I think. He has a villa there." Essaouira, a city on the Atlantic coast, a few hours' drive from Marrakech. Known for its beauty, white houses and blue shutters, popular with European expats and tourists. "Do you know this man's name? What did he look like?" Amina shook her head. "I don't know his name. Tall, graying, with a neat beard. He spoke French with an accent, maybe Belgian or Swiss. Leila said he was a businessman involved in real estate or construction." Yusuf feverishly memorized every detail, already planning how to find this man after the operation in the warehouse. If he still had Leila, if she was alive. "Thank you," he said quietly, squeezing Amina's hand. "Thank you for telling me." "I should have told you sooner," she said regretfully. "But I was afraid to give you false hope. It's been 6 months and I don't know what's wrong with her now." "You've given me more than just hope," Yusuf shook his head. "You've given me direction. A goal. After tomorrow's surgery, I will find this man and bring Leila home." Amina looked at his face, illuminated by the moonlight, and saw in it the same determination that had once helped her plan her escape from Malik's house. A determination bordering on obsession, dangerous in its intensity, but necessary for survival in a world where justice did not come naturally. "We will find her together," she said, and it was not a question or an offer. It was a promise. They sat on the roof for a long time, looking at the stars and planning a future that suddenly seemed less bleak, despite the dangers that awaited them tomorrow. Because now they had a common goal, one that went beyond simply exposing a criminal network. A goal linked to saving a specific person. Leila, Yusuf's sister, who had become for Amina a symbol of all the women who remained in captivity. Dawn over Marrakech came slowly, as if reluctantly. First, the sky in the east brightened, acquiring a pearly hue. Then the first pink strokes appeared, gradually turning into gold. The city was waking up. Muezzins were calling the faithful to morning prayer. The first traders were opening their shops. Street cleaners were sweeping the sidewalks. A hill overlooking the Sidi Ghanem industrial zone, Yusuf and Hassan took up position before the first signs of dawn. Camouflaged among rocks and sparse vegetation, they set up a camera with a powerful telephoto lens aimed at the warehouse, a nondescript gray building with rusty gates and a chain-link fence. "No movement for 2 hours," Hassan whispered, lowering his binoculars. "Maybe we've got the wrong place?" "No," Yusuf shook his head. Amina was sure. "This is the warehouse." They continued their observation, recording every detail, every change in the situation. Gradually, the activity around the warehouse began to increase. 2 SUVs with tinted windows arrived, from which strong men with weapons got out, taking up positions along the perimeter. Then a black Mercedes drove up, from which an elegantly dressed man got out. Malik al-Farsi himself, recognizable even from a distance by his distinctive gait and expensive suit. "It started," Yusuf whispered, activating the camera and starting filming. A few minutes later, a truck with a container drove through the gates of the warehouse, an inconspicuous one with the logo of a non-existent transport company. The guards quickly closed the gates, hiding what was happening from prying eyes. But Yusuf and Hassan, thanks to their position on the hill, could see the inner courtyard. What they saw made their hearts clench with rage and compassion. Women were being led out of the container. Dozens of young women and girls, many barely older than their teens. Exhausted, disoriented, they squinted in the morning sun, some crying, others looking too exhausted to even cry. Yusuf methodically recorded everything on camera, the faces of the guards, the license plates of the cars, the process of handing over the money. Malik, who was in charge of the operation. Every frame was potential evidence, every second of the video, a nail in the coffin of the criminal organization. "Oh my God," Hassan whispered, as one of the girls was brutally hit with a rifle butt as she tried to escape. "How can this happen? In the 21st century? How can people treat other people like this?" Yusuf didn't answer, focused on the filming, but inside him a storm of emotions raged. Anger, disgust, determination to see it through no matter the cost. Suddenly Hassan tensed up, peering through the binoculars. "Something's wrong," he said. "Security has started checking the perimeter. Someone sounded the alarm." Yusuf looked up from the camera and saw that the guards had indeed spread out, scanning the area. One of them pointed in the direction of the hill where they were hiding. "We've been spotted." Hassan grabbed Yusuf by the shoulder. "We need to leave, now." They quickly gathered their equipment and began to retreat, trying to stay in the shadows and not make unnecessary noise. But it was too late. The roar of engines came from the warehouse. 2 SUVs drove out of the gate and headed in their direction. "Run," Hassan commanded, and they rushed to the place where they had left the car, an old Fiat, rented under a false name. The chase began. The pursuers' SUVs were more powerful and faster than their modest car, but Hassan knew the city like the back of his hand. He drove through the narrow streets of the old city, where the massive jeeps lost their advantage, weaved between markets and residential areas, changed direction several times to throw off pursuit. "Are we out of the loop?" Yusuf asked, looking back. "Not for long." Hassan swerved into an alley, narrowly missing a fruit vendor. "They know the city as well as I do, and they've probably called for reinforcements. We need to get out of Marrakech. But first we have to send the materials to Karim." Yusuf pulled out a laptop from his bag. "If something happens to us, the evidence must not be lost." Hassan nodded, recognizing the logic of this decision. He drove toward an area with numerous internet cafes, where Yusuf could quickly upload videos and photos to a secure server. "You'll have 5 minutes, Hassan said, stopping the car in front of an inconspicuous establishment. "I'll wait with the engine running. If I see anything suspicious, I'll signal." Yusuf nodded and quickly entered the internet cafe. Selecting a computer in the far corner, he connected the camera and began uploading the materials. At the same time, he wrote a short message to Karim, explaining the situation and asking her to publish the materials as soon as possible. The download was painfully slow, the files were large, and the internet connection was poor. Yusuf glanced nervously at the progress indicator and the door, expecting to see his pursuers at any moment. Finally, the download was complete. Yusuf sent the message, deleted all traces of his activity from the computer, and quickly left the cafe, and froze. Hassan was not in the car. Instead, next to the Fiat was a black SUV, and next to it was Rashid, holding a gun and pointing it at Yusuf. "Detective Yusuf," Rashid said with a cold smile. "Finally we meet in person. Malik will be pleased to meet you." Yusuf looked around, frantically, looking for a way to escape, but the street was empty, too early for ordinary passers-by, and the few who saw the scene hurried to hide, not wanting to get involved with armed men. "Where is Hassan?" he asked, buying time. "Your friend put up a fight," Rashid shrugged with mock regret. "Unfortunately, it ended badly for him." Yusuf felt a cold fury rise inside him. Hassan, his friend, the man who had risked everything to help him. "Don't do anything stupid, detective." Rashid seemed to read his mind. "Unlike your friend, Malik needs you alive, at least for now." 2 thugs got out of the SUV and approached Yusuf. He knew that resistance was futile. They were armed, there were 3 of them, and he was alone and unarmed. "But the main thing is that the materials have already been sent. The evidence is safe." Even if something happens to him, the truth will come out. The thought gave him a strange sense of calm as he was shoved into the trunk of an SUV, his hands bound with plastic zip ties. The last thing he saw before the trunk lid slammed shut was the rising sun over the minarets of Marrakech, a beautiful and cruel city where people's destinies were broken and remade with an indifference worthy of the ancient gods. The car pulled away, taking him into the unknown. But in the darkness of the trunk, Yusuf clung to one thought, one hope, that Amina and his mother were safe in the mountains, that the materials would reach Karim, that the truth about the trafficking ring would be revealed to the world, and that somewhere there, in Essaouira, his sister Leila is still alive and waiting to be rescued. The salty Atlantic wind ruffled Amina's hair as she stood on the roof of an abandoned building in the port area of Essaouira. The White City, as tourists called it, spread out before her, a maze of narrow streets, whitewashed houses with blue shutters and ancient ramparts that had stood against the ocean waves for centuries. The beauty of the place seemed to mock the dark reality that lurked behind the facades of luxurious villas and trendy restaurants. 3 days have passed since Yusuf disappeared. 3 days of agonizing anticipation, fear, and preparation for a desperate plan. Karim, an international journalist and friend of Yusuf, received his materials, photos and videos of the unloading of human goods at a warehouse in Marrakech. But instead of publishing them immediately, as Yusuf had requested, she decided to use them as a bargaining chip in a larger game. A game in which the lives of Yusuf and Leila were at stake. "We have to be careful," Karim said when they met in a small cafe on the outskirts of Essaouira. "If we publish the materials now, Malik will get rid of Yusuf. He will be useless to them." Amina understood the logic, but every hour of delay felt like a betrayal. The women captured on video had already disappeared into the depths of the criminal network, sold, enslaved, bereft of hope. "We have a plan," Karim continued, lowering her voice. "My colleagues from an international anti-trafficking organization are coordinating the operation with clean units of the Moroccan police. But they need more evidence, not just about Malik, but about his patrons, about the end points of the network." "The Jackal," Amina said, the name she had heard in Malik's house. "The man behind all this." Karim nodded. "We suspect that this is Pierre Duval, a French businessman with extensive connections in Morocco and Europe. Officially, he is involved in real estate and tourism. Unofficially, he buys and sells women." Amina finished, remembering the European who had taken Leila. Tall, graying, with a neat beard. Karim's eyes widened. "Do you know him?" "I saw him once in Malik's house. He took Leila, Yusuf's sister." Karim quickly wrote down this information. "This links him directly to the network. But we need more concrete evidence of his involvement so that the French authorities can issue an arrest warrant. Otherwise, he will simply disappear into Europe, where he has many safe houses and influential friends." "And where will we find this evidence?" Karim took a photograph out of her bag, an aerial shot of a luxurious villa on the coast, surrounded by a high fence and a security system. "Here, Villa Duval in Essaouira. According to our information, several women are being held there, including possibly Leila. And most likely Yusuf is being held there too." Amina studied the photograph, feeling her resolve grow. She had escaped one hell only to willingly enter another. But this time, not as a victim, but as a savior. "How do we get there?" Karim smiled, not cheerfully, but with the cold determination of a professional accustomed to working in dangerous areas. I have a plan, but it will require incredible courage from you. Now, standing on the roof and looking at Duval's villa through binoculars, Amina recalled their conversation. The plan had been risky, almost insane. But there were no other options. The radio in her pocket came to life, Titmouse calling Swallow. "Are you in position?" Karim's voice, using code names, sounded tense. "Swallow in position," Amina replied. "I see the main gate and a security patrol. 2 men armed." "Accepted. The Eagle is moving forward." The Eagle is the code name for a special unit of the Moroccan police, unaffiliated with corrupt structures. They were waiting for the signal to begin the operation, but first Amina and Karim had to get inside and find evidence linking Duval to the human trafficking network. Amina climbed down from the roof and headed to the agreed meeting place. The plan was simple and terrible at the same time. She had to pretend to be Duval's new purchase, delivered on his order. Karim, using her connections, organized a fake transfer through one of the informants embedded in the network. A nondescript van was waiting for her in a small alley. Inside, Karim helped her prepare for her role. A simple dress, minimal makeup, a look of submission and fear on her face. It wasn't just a disguise. It was a return to the past, to the victimhood that Amina had tried so desperately to leave behind. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Karim asked, seeing how Amina's hands were shaking. "No," she answered honestly. "But I have to. For Yusuf, for Leila, for all the women who are still out there." Karim nodded, respecting her decision. "Remember, the microphone is sewn into the lining of the dress. The beacon is in the pendant. Once you're inside, try to find Yusuf or the evidence. You'll have an hour at most before we start the operation." Amina nodded, trying to calm her racing heart. She knew the chances of success were slim, that she might be discovered, that Yusuf or Leila might not be at the villa, that things might not go as planned. But she also knew this was her only chance. The van stopped a few blocks from Duval's villa. Amina was to go with an informant, a man who introduced himself as Farid, who allegedly worked for Malik and had brought special goods for Duval. "Ready?" Farid asked, glancing nervously at his watch. Amina nodded, not trusting her voice. She got into character, slumping her shoulders, looking down, letting the fear that had always lived deep inside come to the surface. They approached the gates of the villa. Farid spoke to the guards, showed some documents. After a short check, the gates opened, letting them in. The grounds of the villa were well kept, with exotic plants and marble statues. A fountain in the center of the garden created the illusion of tranquility and luxury. But Amina saw a prison behind this facade, a beautiful, expensive one, but still a prison. They were met by the manager, a middle-aged European with cold eyes and a professional smile. "Monsieur Duval was expecting delivery tomorrow," he said, looking appraisingly at Amina. "The plans have changed," Farid replied. After the incident in Marrakech, Malik decided to speed up the process. The manager frowned but nodded. "Okay, I'll go through the standard procedure and prepare her for the meeting with Monsieur Duval." Amina felt a chill run down her spine. Standard procedure was a euphemism for the humiliating examination she'd undergone at Malik's house. But that was the least of her worries right now. "Where are the documents?" the manager asked Farid. He pulled out an envelope and handed it over. Inside were forged documents prepared by Karim's team, photographs of Amina, medical certificates, even a fake sales contract. It all looked convincing enough for a quick inspection, but would not stand up to closer inspection. The manager glanced at the papers and nodded. "It's all right. Monsieur Duval will be back in an hour. She should be ready by then." Farid nodded, took the envelope with the money and left, leaving Amina alone with the manager. The plan had worked. She was inside. Now the most dangerous part began. "Follow me," the manager said, leading her through the villa's luxurious hall to a side staircase. "Your room is on the second floor. You'll find everything you need to prepare there." Amina followed him obediently, memorizing the layout of the rooms, the surveillance cameras, the potential escape routes. Her gaze, though downcast, took in every detail. On the second floor, the manager opened the door to a spacious room with a large bed, a dressing room, and a bathroom. Everything was tastefully decorated: cream walls, silk curtains, antique furniture, a golden cage. "Take a shower, change your clothes." The manager pointed to the dressing room where expensive dresses hung. "I'll be back for you in an hour." He went out, closing the door. Amina heard the click of the lock. She was locked in, as expected. As soon as the manager's footsteps faded, she rushed to the window. Second floor, too high to jump. CCTV cameras on the corners of the building. Security patrolling the garden. Getting out of here would not be easy. But first, Yusuf and evidence had to be found. Amina quickly scanned the room, looking for secret passages or weak points. Old Moroccan houses often had hidden passages between rooms for servants or harem residents. Perhaps this reconstructed villa retained some of the original elements. A strange asymmetry in the wall of the dressing room caught her attention. Pushing aside the dresses, she discovered a barely noticeable door. Not locked, just tightly pressed against the wall. Amina's heart began to beat faster. She carefully pulled the hidden handle, and the door swung silently open, revealing a narrow corridor. Without thinking, Amina slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The hallway was dimly lit by floor-mounted lights. It ran along the outside wall of the building, with branches leading presumably to other rooms. She moved carefully, listening to the sounds behind the walls. From some rooms came muffled voices, music, the sounds of the television. Life in the villa went on as usual, unaware of the uninvited guest in the secret passages. Suddenly, Amina heard voices speaking French, a man's, commanding, and a woman's, pleading. She froze, listening. "You disappoint me, Leila," the man said in a thick accent. "After everything I've done for you. Please, let me at least call my mother," a female voice answered, with a hint of desperation in it. "Just so she knows I'm alive." "Impossible. You know the rules." Leila, Yusuf's sister. She was here, in this room, separated from Amina by only a thin wall. Amina frantically searched for a way to peer inside and found a small ventilation grill at eye level. It offered a view of a luxurious bedroom where a tall, graying man, undoubtedly Pierre Duval, stood over a young woman sitting on the edge of the bed. Leila looked exhausted, but there was still a fire of defiance in her eyes. "Your brother is causing trouble," Duval continued, pouring himself a glass of whiskey from a crystal decanter. "Very serious trouble." Leila raised her head. "Yusuf? Do you know anything about him?" "Oh, more than anything," Duval chuckled. "He's my guest now, in the basement." Amina's heart skipped a beat. Yusuf was here, in the villa, alive. "What did you do to him?" Leila's voice was filled with fear. "Nothing. Yet, Malik wanted to get rid of him right away. But I convinced him that your brother could be useful. He has information, contacts in the press, and he will serve as a good lesson for other curious journalists. Duval took a sip of whiskey and looked at his watch. I have a meeting with him soon. Perhaps you would like to attend. A family reunion, so to speak. Leila clenched her fists but remained silent, obviously realizing the futility of protests. Duval headed for the door. Think about your behavior, ma chérie. I have been patient, but my patience is not infinite. When the door closed behind him, Leila buried her face in the pillow, stifling her sobs. Amina had to act fast. Yusuf was in the basement. Leila was here on the second floor. Duval was going to meet Yusuf. Perhaps this was a chance to gather evidence against both men at the same time. She continued down the secret corridor, looking for a way down. Eventually, she found a narrow staircase leading to the first floor, and presumably to the basement. As she descended, Amina found herself in an even darker, dustier corridor. This part of the secret passages was clearly used less often. She moved almost by touch, guided by the weak light coming through the cracks and vents. Finally, she heard voices, muffled but distinct. One of them was undoubtedly Yusuf's. "The journalists already have the evidence," he said. And despite his fatigue, there was confidence in his voice. "You lost, Malik. You and your boss." Such confidence. It was Malik's voice, which Amina would recognize out of 1,000, even with broken fingers and the prospect of much more serious damage. Torture will not change the facts. Videos of container unloading, customer lists, routes, all this is already in the hands of international organizations. The question is not whether you will fall, but how soon. There was a pause, then a third voice spoke up, cold and with a French accent. "Duval, your optimism is admirable, Mr. Reed, but you overestimate the effectiveness of law enforcement and underestimate the depth of our connections. Even if some links in the chain are compromised, the organization itself will survive." "Not this time," Yusuf replied. "There are too many eyes on this case. The stakes are too high." Amina found an air vent through which she could see into the basement room. Yusuf was tied to a chair, his face bruised, several of his fingers bent unnaturally. Broken, just as Malik had said, but his eyes held the same fire she had seen in his sister's, defiant, determined. Malik paced nervously around the room, clearly uneasy about the situation. Duval, on the other hand, remained icy calm, sitting in a chair opposite Yusuf, as if in a business negotiation. "Let me explain your situation, Monsieur Reed," Duval said, lighting an expensive cigar. "Your sister is at my complete disposal. Your mother is under the surveillance of my people in Marrakech. Your journalist friend, whom you trust so much, has skeletons in her closet that you do not suspect." He paused, blowing a smoke ring. "I propose a deal. You give us full access to your sources, your press contacts, and all the materials you have collected. In return, you and your sister receive new documents and the opportunity to start a new life in Europe. A generous offer, given the circumstances." Yusuf looked at Duval with undisguised contempt. "What if I refuse?" "Then we'll start with your sister, right here, before your eyes. Then we'll move on to your mother. And we'll finish with you. Slowly. Very slowly." Amina saw Yusuf tense, fighting, rage and fear. She knew she had to act now. The microphone in her dress was recording the entire conversation. Duval's direct threats, his admission of kidnapping Leila, his connection to Malik. This was exactly the evidence they were looking for. She carefully backed away from the vent and pulled the beacon out of its cradle. Activating it, she signaled Karim and the special police unit that the operation should begin immediately. Now she had to find a way to free Yusuf and Leila before the assault began. In the chaos, Duval or Malik might try to get rid of the witnesses. Amina continued to explore the secret corridor, looking for an exit to the basement. Eventually, she found a small door leading to the room next to the interrogation room, a kind of storage room filled with old furniture and boxes. Through a crack in the half-closed door, she could see a guard standing at the entrance to the room where Yusuf was being held. One man, armed but relaxed. He did not expect danger from inside the house. Amina looked around the storeroom for a weapon or tool. Among the junk, she found a heavy metal statuette, heavy enough to stun a person with a well-aimed strike. She took a deep breath, gathering her strength. Her whole being protested against returning to violence, even if she was no longer a victim but a protector. But there was no other way. Amina opened the door slightly and called quietly, "Help, please, help." The guard tensed, listening. "Who's there?" he asked, approaching the storeroom with his weapon at the ready. "Help," Amina repeated in a weak voice. "I'm locked in." The guard carefully opened the door of the storeroom, holding the gun in front of him. The moment he stepped over the threshold, Amina dropped the statuette on his head. The blow was accurate. The guard collapsed without a sound, unconscious. Amina quickly searched him, taking his gun, keys, and radio. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline and determination. She locked the unconscious guard in the storeroom and headed for the door of the interrogation room. Listening closely, she heard the conversation continuing. "Time is running out, Monsieur Reed," Duval said. "My patience is not unlimited." "As well as mine," Yusuf replied. "I have given you my answer." "That's a pity. Malik, bring his sister." It was time for action. Amina took a deep breath, gripped the gun with both hands, and swung the door open. 3 pairs of eyes stared at her in surprise. Yusuf, despite the pain, couldn't help but smile. Malik froze halfway to the door, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. Duval remained seated in his chair, his eyebrows raised slightly. The very picture of cold control. "Amina," Malik breathed out, clearly not believing his eyes. "How did you—" "Don't move." Amina pointed the gun at him, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "Put your hands where I can see." Malik slowly raised his hands, his face contorted, in rage and humiliation. "You're making a huge mistake, girl," Duval said, still keeping his cool. "Put down your weapon and we'll discuss your situation in a civilized manner." "The discussion is over," Amina replied, keeping her eyes on Malik, who posed the greatest immediate threat. "The police are on their way. They have all the evidence of your activities." "The police?" Duval laughed. "My dear, half the Essaouira police department is on my payroll." "The wrong police." Amina allowed herself a thin smile. "A special unit from Rabat, working with Interpol. They're surrounding the villa right now." As if to confirm her words, the sound of a helicopter was heard outside, followed by a series of loud commands, amplified by a megaphone. Duval's face finally changed, the mask of imperturbability cracking to reveal a mixture of fear and rage. "That's impossible," he hissed. "My sources would have warned me." "Your sources didn't know." Amina took a step toward Yusuf, not lowering her weapon. The operation was prepared in complete secrecy, with the involvement of international organizations. The first shots were heard outside. A shootout began between the villa's security and the special forces. Malik, taking advantage of the moment when Amina's attention was divided, suddenly rushed forward. Amina fired instinctively, without thinking. The bullet hit Malik in the shoulder, throwing him back. He fell, clutching the wound and cursing Amina in every language he knew. Duval, seeing that the situation was getting out of control, made a desperate move. He pulled a small pistol from under his jacket and put it to Yusuf's head. "Get back," he ordered Amina, "or your journalist hero dies right now." Amina froze, her gun now pointed at Duval. "Stalemate. Even if you kill him, you can't escape," she said, trying to sound calm. "The villa is surrounded. All exits are blocked. I have a secret passage." Duval smiled, but his eyes remained icy. "And a hostage. The perfect combination for a successful escape." At that moment, the door behind Amina swung open. She instinctively turned around, expecting to see security or police. But Leila stood on the threshold, pale, determined, with a heavy vase in her hands. Taking advantage of Duval's momentary hesitation, Yusuf, despite his tied hands and broken fingers, jerked sharply to the side, moving his head out from under the gun's barrel. Duval fired, but the bullet only grazed Yusuf's ear. Leila screamed and threw the vase at Duval. The heavy porcelain hit him in the face, breaking his nose and disorienting him for critical seconds. Amina didn't hesitate. She fired twice, just like she'd been taught to do in the shooting club before her life had turned into a nightmare. The first bullet hit Duval in the shoulder, the second in the leg. He fell, dropping his gun and howling in pain. The next moment, special forces burst into the room. Black uniforms, automatic weapons, clear commands. Amina slowly lowered her pistol and raised her hands, showing that she posed no threat. "Amina." "Tazi?" the unit commander asked. "Karim warned about you. Good job." She nodded, suddenly feeling the adrenaline recede, leaving exhaustion behind. Leila was already at Yusuf's side, freeing him from the ropes, whispering words of comfort and support. Malik and Duval were escorted out, wounded but alive. They would testify, answer for their crimes in court. Perhaps their connections and money would soften their sentences, but their reputation, their evil empire, was irrevocably destroyed. Amina watched as the medics examined Yusuf's wounds. As the brother and sister finally reunited, could not stop touching each other, as if afraid the other would disappear. She felt strangely detached, as if she were watching the final scene of a film in which she had played an important but temporary role. Karim found her on the terrace of the villa an hour later, when the main operation was completed. Amina was sitting, looking at the ocean visible in the distance, endless, free, indifferent to human dramas. "It's over," Karim said, sitting down next to him. "We found documents in Duval's office, complete client lists, financial reports, even video recordings of the product. An international arrest warrant has already been issued for the Jackal." Amina nodded, not taking her eyes off the horizon. "And the other women? The ones who were in the warehouse?" "The Marrakech police are raiding all the addresses we have identified. Some have already been found. We will continue to search for the rest." "Okay," Amina said quietly. Karim studied her face, beautiful even now, after everything she had been through, but marked with scars that could not be seen with the eyes. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. "When is it all over?" Amina smiled for the first time, not forcedly, not out of politeness, but sincerely, with a glimmer of hope. "Live," she answered simply. "Just live." 6 months later, Amina stood outside a courthouse in Rabat, watching as journalists surrounded Yusuf and Karim, eager for comment on the trial that had just ended. Malik Al-Fassi and Pierre Duval had been sentenced to long prison terms. Dozens of their accomplices were also on trial. A human trafficking network that had operated in Morocco for years had been dismantled. Not entirely, of course. Amina was not naive. As long as there is demand, there will be supply. But today's verdict was a signal. Crimes of this scale will no longer go unpunished. Leila walked up to her holding 2 cups of mint tea. "You didn't go to the sentencing," she said, handing 1 cup to Amina. "I didn't want to see their faces again," she replied, accepting the tea. "It's enough that they'll haunt my nightmares for years to come." Leila nodded in understanding. Over the past months, a special bond had formed between them. Not exactly friendship, more like a sisterhood based on a shared experience that was impossible to explain to anyone who hadn't been there themselves. "Yusuf said you were leaving." Leila looked at her with slight sadness. "Yes. Tomorrow." "Where?" "First to Imlil, to visit my mother and brother. Then perhaps to Europe. Karim helped me get a scholarship to the University of Barcelona." "What will you study?" "International law," Amina smiled, seeing the surprise on Leila's face. "I want to specialize in protecting the rights of victims of human trafficking." Leila squeezed her hand. "You will be a great lawyer. And you? Will you return to school?" "Yes, next semester. But not to Tangier. I'll stay in Marrakech, closer to my mother." They paused, watching as Yusuf finally freed himself from the journalists and walked toward them. His physical wounds were healed, his broken fingers were mended, his bruises were gone. But something in his eyes was forever changed. A depth, an understanding of the darker side of human nature that had not been there before. "Ready?" he asked, approaching them. "Mother is expecting us for dinner." Amina nodded, finishing her tea. Fatima had insisted that she live with them for the duration of the trial. "You're part of our family now," the older woman said, and there was no empty politeness in her words, only genuine gratitude and acceptance. They headed to the car, leaving behind the courthouse with its cold formality and painful memories. Ahead was dinner with people who had become closer to her than she could have imagined. Ahead was an evening of quiet conversations and moments of simple human warmth. And then, the unknown of a new life. The life she chose. The life she deserved. Amina lifted her face to the sky, feeling the warm wind play with her hair. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, a future awaited. Not perfect, not cloudless, but her own. And that was enough. More than enough. She got into the car next to Leila, and Yusuf pulled away, taking them away from the past and toward whatever lay ahead.